This week I had a fascinating conversation about all that we can learn and harness from nature with Claire Vanderplank. Now Claire, through her company Weapons of Mass Creation, provides a vision quest service. And so through this conversation we really dived into what is a vision quest, but most importantly the role of nature within that. And from that we opened out the conversation to all that we can learn from the systems within nature. This really is a super conversation with a lady who has spent a lot of time going solo by herself out into nature, and you can really tell that there's a lot of depth of character that she's drawing on here. So enjoy Claire. Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host Bryn Edwards. Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming Claire Vanderplank.
Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. So those who don't know you, you are very big in wilderness, coaching, shamanic work, body work, vision questing, and you've even created Weapons of Mass Creation recently. So I love that. Tell me a bit more about Weapons of Mass Creation.
Well, that's my business name, basically.
That's your business name. Yeah, there's the umbrella for all the things I've just mentioned.
For all the things, which is actually quite, there's quite a lot in just explaining the evolution of that name, because it actually started back when I did have a full-time job and I wasn't really thinking about having my own business, but I wanted to I've always sort of looking at the bigger picture and seeing how society is functioning, and I just got really into it was sort of back in the era when flash mobs were really big, and I just kind of really liked that little putting in a little disruption thing. So I had organized a couple of community things, not flash mobs,
yes,
but varying from making a funny video to help get a certain senator re-elected to doing a community world cafe, Dialogic World Cafe, to help co-create the community response to this long-term energy plan.
Yeah.
And so I just needed because I wasn't doing it for work, I was doing it for me.
Yes.
Or for the community, so I needed a name. So that name came about through do you know Faithless? The old school UK underground beginning of rap. Yeah,
very much so. Yes.
Yeah, so
I've been to see them live several times.
Yeah, they have a song about weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
But in that song, the lyrics kind of play on the what is a weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah.
And so out of that, I kind of thought, well, what's a weapon of mass creation?
Yes.
And so I'd picked that name even before I got into the spiritual stuff, and then now it's taken on this whole other meaning for me, even though lots of people are like, well, you should just be using your name because it's just you, and branding wise you should just use your name, it's simpler. But I can't let go of that name, Weapons of Mass Creation, because
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I realized that's really what I am about, is even through work with whether it's individuals or a group of people, it is about how do we get more in touch with just creation itself and the patterns of creation, and express those harmonious patterns of creation in an intentional way, such that we can, restore harmony, whatever else, all those lovely things. But the name Weapons of Mass Creation to me captures the energy of it, because there is a fierceness and a warrior to-ness, but it's also about, there's a play on words with creation versus destruction, so that it's about love and unity and all the rest of it, but then actually how do we work together in a way that, and not just together as humans, but actually together as all of creation.
Yes.
And that's stuck with the name.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because one of the things that shines through with you is your sort of fierce passion around integrating with nature. Where does that come from in the Claire journey?
I think to a certain extent, I couldn't really ever have separated it from who I am, not just in a general way, we're all nature, but it's always been something that's been a part of me. Even when I was a kid, I think I was in year 3, and I'd watched a documentary on dolphins the night before, And then in show and tell in class the next day, I stood up and told the class that dolphins were more intelligent than humans because they didn't destroy their environment. And I think I was doing a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Because then the teacher got me to go and sit down.
Right.
So it's always been a part of me. But then, you know, I'd sort of gone on a journey of kind of always knew that I needed to work with people. So I'd gotten into the health profession originally, but did feel like I wasn't being able to link that to, you know, sustainability issues sufficiently. And eventually come around to work, you know, as a, I guess, sort of in corporate kind of sustainability. But during that time, I had gone through a big sort of phase shift in my life after getting hit by a truck.
In New Zealand.
Yeah, so it was, you know, a literal getting hit by a truck, not a metaphorical one.
Yes.
Although, you know, the effects were probably both literal and metaphorical in that way. Because I ended up having to do something different. Like, it had hurt me just enough that I was, you know, left a little bit damaged.
Gave you a life slap, as I
Totally.
refer to it.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I certainly tried to ignore it for as long as I could. But because it was a physical...
What were you ignoring?
The pain, or pain, but then also... you know, like I was thinking, oh, if I told someone what I was feeling, they would say I was depressed, except that I don't get depressed, so I don't understand what this is. But everything, all the hard things, you know, like everybody used to ups and downs, but I was always able to just go, oh, well, I'll just wait for it to pass and it will pass. But this one wasn't passing.
Yeah.
But...
So it demanded your attention.
Yeah, but I certainly, you know, pushed the edge of that. Like, no, just keep, I was like, oh, all right, I can't actually work this one out for myself, which was probably the first time in my life I've ever had that, oh, I can't actually just do this by myself.
Right.
And there's more of a story, you know, in how things kind of lined up for me to get to this point, but I ended up going on what we call I say we, because now I'm part of this lineage way of nature. Certainly didn't think that was going to be the case. Like, early on, I just knew I needed to feel connected again.
Yes.
I saw an invite for something that was spend a week alone with guaranteed no one's going to talk to you. In the wilderness of Flinders Island, Tasmania.
Wow.
I was like, fuck yeah. Like, no one's going to talk to me for a week. Like, take me.
Gold.
Yeah, and so I signed up. Yeah, just basically going, okay, you know, I sensed that this was going to be a deep rest that I really needed at that point in time. But, you know, what I got from it was so much more, and then did go on and, you know, dramatically change the course of my life. But, you know, back to that question about how nature, you know, became a real strong part of my journey. Like, it was during that first sacred passage that
on Flinders.
Yeah, on Flinders, where I had that first real taste of just what a magic, enchanted, dynamic process of, you know, being in constant dialogue that is possible when you're in deep connection. Like, I had never... With nature.
Yeah.
/ spirit, but there's no, you know, experiences like that show you that there's no difference, you know. Nature is spirit made manifest, and you know, you can see how spirit operates through looking at nature. But that's when I kind of, you know, got things in this, like, it completely changed my whole worldview. And so from then being a, you know, very intellectually based sustainability person,
right,
my approach to what I was trying to do then, you know, even though the intention in a way was the same, but the approach to it was, you know, a whole 180.
Right.
And that's how I've ended up, you know, slowly then getting back to doing healing work. You know, worked in health before, but not sure how much of it was real healing. Yeah. Plus then, of course, you know, doing the nature quests and vision quests.
Yes.
And yeah, building on that.
Building from that place.
Yep.
Tell me about vision quests. Because I myself have not done one.
there's something very attractive about the idea. For those who don't know, tell me about what they are and what role they play.
Well, Vision Quest, for a start, the terminology comes from Native American culture. Even though you see around the world, there's always practices of spending solo time in nature in some form. But Vision Quest, the term comes from a ritual practice where an individual would feel, sometimes it was you do it as a rite of passage, moving into adulthood. In some cultures it was used in a way that, just whenever you felt that it was time, you did it. So there's always some variation, but
there's a bit of a call from within.
Yeah, because you have to be ready for it, because the level of surrender that's required is so great that if you're not actually 100%, yes, I really want to do this, even though you can feel very nervous about it, because to go back to what it is, it involves spending a period of time. 4 days is a common time frame for it. Sometimes it would vary. You leave when you've received your vision, so it could be however long it takes. But yeah, you go out to a place in nature, which of course back then was everywhere, still is everywhere, but meaning quite wild places where you're going to be in guaranteed solitude.
Yeah.
You have to stay in one small circle, and you're not allowed to leave for any reason. You can't bring anything with you, so that could mean, traditionally, it could be really a situation where if a modern human was placed in it, they would be likely to die, meaning no food, no water, no clothing, no shelter, and often on a mountaintop or something, so you're really exposed to the elements. In some cases, no sleep, so that the line between the waking and the dreaming state was blurred.
Blurry, yeah.
As well as just putting you through, even more of an ordeal. But with the purpose of receiving a vision for what your true purpose is in this lifetime.
Sounds like Jesus' 40 days and 40 nights.
Exactly.
Wild locusts and honey.
Exactly. It's no coincidence that, Jesus, Buddha, they had these profound transformations and realizations while in nature.
Yeah, on their own.
On their own. The solitude's so important because so many of those, the blocks to being in a constant state of connection come because of or through human relationship. So even though we can feel relatively, relaxed, or we don't think of ourselves as having, social anxiety or attachment issues or, whatever it is, we actually still are, to a certain degree, holding a lot of, armoring to, and partly it's just actually, it's healthy to functioning that way because
in the current society and thing that we're playing.
Yeah, I mean, even just in general, just to be, doing things throughout the day, there's a certain level of a particular kind of functioning that you need to, serve your role in your tribe or community or society. But in order to, have those kind of breakthrough realizations, it sort of does take you to be in a different state. So solitude's one of the 6 empowerments that we kind of talk about. So traditional vision quest was very much around you receiving a vision guidance on your purpose. And then in so much as it is a rite of passage, then when you go back to your community, and it's all held in ceremony, it looks individual, but actually, it's supported.
But it's set within the context of the tribe.
Exactly.
And the culture there.
Yeah.
And how they do things.
And you'll have some, people know that you're out there and they're energetically holding you and they help prepare you. And then when you come back, they receive you back and then you're recognised as changed. And so in a traditional context, a vision quest would be used, okay, all right, so you've received this vision and now we recognise that that's something that you have to fulfil. and it, you know, then relates to how
So
people fit within there.
So I imagine in that time, you would be able to speak freely and share your vision, and you know, and dissect it, integrate,
Yeah.
and then it become part of you and what you do,
Yeah.
and be respected and held in that place.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I mean, I don't want
And I
to
delineate that because we'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and also I don't want to, you know, claim that I'm an expert on traditional vision quests because, you know, I'm not Native American. And also the quests that I run, we try to base it on intercultural principles. So we use the format of a vision quest because it's so effective, and still hold one of the core intents is to help people uncover their true purpose in this lifetime. But it's also very much about how do we deepen into connection, because for modern people, like in a traditional context, you don't really need to be taught, like the culture does the job of holding people in connection.
Yes.
That you don't necessarily need certain practices
Yeah.
that you do
To supplement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the culture already does that. You're born into it, and there's never any need to go, okay, well, I'm over here and all disconnected, and so I need to do these things to, you know, whereas these days we're all, you know, almost all of us are born into a really deep worldview that promotes separation.
Yes.
And so we very much use, you know, we call it intercultural principles. So the founder of Way of Nature, my teacher, looked at, you know, what wisdom traditions around the world do in order to cultivate deeper connection. And he sort of distilled out the core set of those principles.
Yep.
And we use that as the framework for Way of Nature.
Right.
And then we go and apply it in nature,
Yeah.
honouring, you know, nature is the greatest church or temple or teacher that we'll ever need. And the format
that.
of the Vision Quest is just so effective.
So what does a modern day format that you
Yeah,
now
so
run look like?
we let people take water.
That's nice.
So that's good.
Yes.
So
Clothes.
there's clothes. They can take
alright.
clothes. I mean, everyone ends up naked at some point in time.
Yeah,
Like,
of course you do.
because you're on your solo, the sun's out, and even people who wouldn't even like have thought that that's a thing, but everyone, you know, like without fail gets the urge to go, oh yeah, like, because no one's around.
So I lived in the Alps for nearly a year, and one summer I was there over the summer in a ski resort, and I walked up to the top of this mountain, and you know, I've got my sandwiches out, and I just think, yeah, right. Chopped all the kit off and just sat there and just, you know, drank my water, ate my sandwiches, looked out across the valley for half an hour, popped my togs back on.
Yeah.
Rode back. Anyway, fast forward 3 weeks later, and there's another guy who was in a bar, and there wasn't many people in this ski resort, and he said, oh, I've been to the top of Bergen Selleer. I was like, oh, I went there 3 weeks ago. We're chatting, and I just suddenly said to him, did you get your kit off at the top? Right. And not only did he say yes, but two other guys who were listening in went, oh yeah, we did that, and we were talking about, and so I get that.
Totally.
So sorry. Go on, carry on.
I mean, I think it's not only a point of like, not that I'm not out promoting nudism or whatever, like
Naturalism or
yes,
whatever. Yeah.
nothing against it, but it's not
It's
my task in life. But it shows us the fact that everyone's so, like, it feels like such a relief just to be able to just be in, you know, the skin that you were born in.
Yes.
And I think it's partly because, you know, clothing is a sign of, you know, our social expectations.
Yes.
But then I also think that, you know, at a deeper level, we get that it's also part of our domestication as humans, the fact that we actually need these fabricated clothes. And so, you know, part of that deep connection actually is that, you know, us feeling that we belong out there.
Yeah.
And that we don't need all these tools and gadgets. And like, even if you go on a self-sufficient, you know, hike for a week where you've got all your food and you know how you're going to, you know, purify your water and you've got your tent, you've still got all these things that are actually keeping you from, you know,
that you have to wear as you travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you still are using technology to keep you alive, which is a natural part of being human, as we do use tools and technology. But at some point it keeps continually then removes us steps away from actually just being in one continuous flow with the landscape. And so that feeling of getting back to being part of and arising from the landscape, like, these are just all the little ways that we've managed to put in layers of separation. So sorry to digress.
No. I led you off there mainly. So clothes, water.
We do. That's right.
Yeah.
I was like, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so, we have preparation training before people go out on their solo time. So the format would be, everyone gathers and then we have at least 2 full days to prepare people, which is getting them familiar with the land that we're on, of course, helping them ground and, start to shed the layers of the city or wherever they've come from. And introducing them to the principles of Way of Nature, and then also giving them practices and some tools to use through the process out there. And of course, building the group feel, because as much as it is an individual process, the group becomes a big part of it. Like, it's amazing how much, like, the beautiful stories that come out in the sharing afterwards, like how much people were thinking of each other and how much synchronicity there was through everyone's experience.
You can feel one another, I bet. Yeah.
Which is nice. It's really important because we don't have it, integrated as part of what we do culturally. Doing it as a group then can, in a way, start to make up for the fact that we're not being held by our community.
Yeah.
Which is good. And so then people go out for, usually I have a 4-day solo.
Yeah.
Or all one time. My teacher would always tell us off if we used the word solo, because you're not solo.
Yes. So that's 4 days, 4 nights?
Yep. So people have to stay in, one circle. We're a bit more generous in terms of, like, people can define the space for themselves. Likewise, we don't provide food for people, but if people feel like they're not going to be able to get through the fasting, they can bring some things with them, but that's all up to them. We let people take a tent, but they're also invited, if you just want to sleep, bring a tarp in case it rains. Like, all that's up to you, because people have got different comfort levels. And to a certain extent, it's important that, your comfort zone is being pushed, because if you were comfortable, you wouldn't get that, I'm here to do something special. You need to feel like you can't do it, just like you need to be in that state where you just want spirit, nature to come and be part of it with you.
Yes.
Yeah. And 4 days is good because usually it takes about 3 days for all the crap to kind of just quieten down enough. And because it takes, definitely in the first couple of days, your senses are just learning to open again.
Yeah.
And so in order to pick up on the more subtle level of being, we need our senses to open, and we start to take in things that we didn't know we could just observe without any enhancement, because our senses are so closed off and restricted just from modern life being so stimulating. And that's like, one of the
sympathetic nervous system, the go button switched on so often, and that is very, acutely focused, right from your vision field through to, listening and scanning the environment for threats.
Totally.
To drop into your parasympathetic, where it then suddenly becomes much broader and more witnessing.
Yeah. That's a big part of it, but also just our sensory system in itself, it's like we have different, like, thresholds of tolerance. And even though we might think we're not being overstimulated because we've learned to habituate to it, it still is too much for our sensory system. So operating with the floodgates pretty well closed. But so when we can go, okay, we're in this gentle, sensory environment, we can then really open. And I use the analogy of like trying to feel things with a glove on. I mean, maybe you have a similar experience now with that on your head. Is like we think we're touching everything, but if you take the glove off, you're touching the same things, but with this whole different dimensionality and like a fine grain to it.
Do you leave the guys and girls on their own, or do you drop in on them during the 4 days?
I definitely don't go into anywhere near them physically. We do have a check-in system, so they buddy up with someone, but they don't see each other. They pick a spot sort of between their two sites, and they have to leave a sign for each other. One goes in the morning, one goes in the afternoon.
Right.
Personally, I don't go out. I mean, energetically, I'll check in with them. But
sit, focus on the person, see if you can feel them.
Yeah. Shamanically, there's other techniques as well. But I try not to spy on people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Remote view.
Either remotely or non-remotely, locally. So there are, safety protocols. But in general, like it is safe. Like it's safer than bushwalking. Like you're not even going anywhere. Like there's very little that could happen to you.
Do people take notepad and pen, or?
I let them. Again, it's suggested that they do not take anything.
Right.
Leave it up to them to decide if they want to have a notepad and pen just to capture something that seems very, significant that they really don't want to forget in its accuracy, with the warning that it can very easily slip into starting to analyse and try to make meaning of something before it's really time to do so. So you don't want to get into, even though journaling's a wonderful thing, during the quest is not the time for it. Do that later.
That makes sense.
Not only because it's taking you out of the direct experience during those 4 days, but also because usually what we think has happened is actually not even scratching the surface of what has happened. And as soon as you start to try to make meaning of something, then you're in a way really preventing that sort of deeper unfolding to happen, because you've sort of locked it into, that's what that is, okay, next,
So give me an idea of, without the specifics of people's visions, what is the sort of experience, what are the commonalities of the experience when the vision starts to turn up? The hands out the glove, you sense you are more sensitized in a more grounded manner, and for want of a better phrase, when it starts switching on.
There's a lot of healing that goes on. Catharsis, but just as, like, I think of it, I really think of things as blocks. Like if you picture someone's whole being as just energy, there's these little places where it catches or is really frozen and the energy can't flow freely. Being out in relatively untouched nature, which
we have an abundance of here in Western Australia.
We have, it's, I always hesitate to call things wild or untouched because there's nowhere that's not. But
I guess my reference, moving here from England 10 years ago, we do.
I mean, it's comparatively, and you do just to a certain extent have to work with what you've got. Like, it's still miles better than being in the city in terms of, like, I think of things now a lot more just in terms of patterns and the type of state that a system is in, and the more you can be in places where they're in this really refined, dynamic, harmonious energy, which is always in this state of like moving towards more and more ordered complexity. That's really what I mean. It doesn't necessarily matter exactly, what it is or looks like. but that's like the feeling of the energy that you're kind of looking for.
Yeah.
Anyway, so when we're immersed in that energy, whatever's within us, because there becomes this merging with the field that's around you, if you're holding patterns of energy in you that isn't in this dynamic, refined flow, it starts to kind of, just like if you are sifting something, like the bigger bits like come to the surface.
You're right.
It sort of sifts out the chunks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they come up to be healed. And so, and after that is released, then you can actually enjoy sinking into some level of deeper refinement. And often that can be, that can be the realization in itself, is in the process of letting go of something, you can come to a whole bunch of realizations and new awarenesses about you or about your role and your purpose. But the visions themselves, it's not actually all that often that it's like someone's just pressed play on a movie for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. I mean, I know, one of the visions that I hold that is most meaningful for me in terms of guiding me is something that I received on a sacred passage. I find it's usually happens when I'm sort of just waking up. I tend to take a really long time to wake up, but it's quite useful as well, because then I stay in that liminal state a bit longer. And sometimes, when you sort of think you're awake, but then you go, oh wait, but I'm seeing this thing that must be a dream. That's usually, the time for me that I find it most likely that a spirit's actually going to finally be able to break through the crap and give me something.
When you say spirit, what do you mean by spirit there?
I use that term very generally to sort of, refer to the unseen energies, really. Like, I don't see, in my view, I don't see that there's, a separate realm. There can certainly seem like different kinds of qualities of energy in different zones. And I do have my sort of map of how things are. I do think of it in terms of dimensions, but not in clear, segregation between this is matter and that's spirit. But I'll use the term spirit because there's a lot of beings that don't actually exist in this, supposedly material plane. And there's different degrees of ability to, interact with them depending on, it's all vibration. Like it's, if their vibration's relatively close to how we are, it might be seemingly physical. Seems like some other beings can be a little bit multi-dimensional.
Yep.
I mean, that's the whole practice of shamanism, is allowing your consciousness to move through different zones to return and bring back healing power and information. So yeah, spirit's just a nice general
that's
term.
why I asked.
Yeah. And can be like, you could refer to spirit in a way that's, maybe the Christians will call it Holy Spirit, or the Native Americans might call it Great Spirit, but this really sort of high level, transcendent, it's powerful, but it's also all compassionate, and that's a very particular way of an energy of spirit.
Yeah.
And yet then there's also spirits, for example, that some people might experience as like ghosts in their house. And yeah, you could call that spirit too, but those are, two very different
and
vibrations. And so it's, if I use the word spirit in a Vision Quest context, it's very much that transcendent energy that can guide us and tends to be more beneficial.
So when someone's completed the 4 days, how do they come out of it? Because you've got to be pretty delicate with them.
Yeah. People come back in very different states, which can really depend on, that process of the blocks coming up, being released, and then entering a deeper level of refinement. That can happen the longer you spend out, the more you see that that's sort of like a dance. It's like something comes up, it's released, deeper level of refinement, which creates enough stillness and space for then the next, it's all layers. So depending on where people are in that process, they can come out in different states. Usually though, because people know when the end of it is, there's some form of like, resolving, so that when they come out, they're generally like glowing and floating down the mountain, so to speak.
Yeah. Because you set a time scale, there's something in them that knows that we're going in here and then we're coming out from
exactly.
Like when you set your alarm for 20 minutes of meditation and you're always just like...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
At 19 minutes and 55 seconds.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very much like that.
Yeah, which is cool in its own right.
It is cool. I mean, and that's my favourite part, is like, you'd see people come back and like, sometimes they're just so bright and shiny. You're like, whoa, man, I think I need sunglasses just to look at you. And they're like, I don't feel any, like, really? Like, oh, I thought I was just a bit dirty. Like, but yeah, that's also part of the, we have at least 24 hours together before people go back home, which, sometimes I do wish was longer, but it's hard for people just to take a week off,
Because that is 7 days right there, isn't it?
Yeah, so my standard program's like 8 nights, 7 days, basically. It would be helpful to have more time in the integration phase. It's always a challenge. That's definitely in terms of facilitating these kinds of things. The integration part's always the hardest, because usually, it's not immediately after that the hardest part of integration comes. It's actually, the first slap in the face is getting back to the city. Yeah. Because that's when you realise how open and sensitive you are.
Yeah.
You start to notice
that first time you sort of driving back towards the city, you go to the petrol station and you have to interact with someone or something of that ilk. Pretty incidental. Yeah. But you're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
And then, I've had, it's not been to a vision quest, I've had plenty of experiences of that, and it almost feels like physically jarring.
It is, yeah.
It's like, oh,
yeah.
I don't like this.
Totally. It's a very different mode of operating, which is so much, that's why the process doesn't just happen, during those 4 days. And it's not just an unfolding out of what happened in those 4 days, but...
Do you stay in touch over the following weeks?
Yeah, I'll check in with people. I mean, over time, the more people go through it, the more then I can aim for building, a community. And fortunately, with the place that I use most to run quests now, they hold a really beautiful space too and really welcome people back. So what's happened is that people go back and, visit the place. They're welcome to come back pretty much whenever.
Reconnect with everything.
Yeah, and then people who've done different quests end up meeting each other, and, so that's worked really beautifully in that regard. But yeah, it's a hard thing, especially for people who don't have all that many people around them.
Yes.
Who can really get what just happened.
Yeah.
So I,
or even hold space of what they've done.
Yeah.
Because so in the background of the podcast at the moment, I and a few others are doing a small subjective research project into what we're referring to as sort of psychological or spiritual awakening experiences or existential crises. And one of the things that's coming out in that is that more and more people are being drawn to these interior exploration experiences. So they go into their interior a lot more. And 4 days out in nature, that's a tip-top exposure. I know a lot of people are drawn to psychedelics, and particularly like ayahuasca and stuff like that. And whilst this is going to piss a lot of people off, I find that a bit lazy on one level, because you just drink the thing and then it does it for you and you go off. I mean, you've got to have a bit of bravery to stick it in your mouth and then throw it up.
Yeah.
But it does a job for you. So it's very much from the outside world coming in, whereas this is an internal thing and staying internal. So, but I'm not here to cast judgment on which one's the coolest, hardcore, or any of that crap, right? It's just whatever floats your boat. But ultimately, these are all around exploring our interiors. We don't seem to have a culture that's all set up for even normalizing a discussion around exploring your interior. It's very much a private, intimate space that you just don't share. Or you'll share just a little bit. And then when you have a partner, you know, you'll share a bit more. But then even there, you know, there'll be other layers that you're like, fuck, I'm not telling that, because they'll think I'm a fucking nut job or something like that. And I don't want to lose the partnership and the friend, you know, and the closeness, the intimacy and the love and affection that comes with that. So more and more what I'm finding is that people explore their interior through one method or thing or another. And yeah, it's not straight away when things start to happen. It can be in weeks, months later that all of a sudden something's changed. The way they make sense of the world, their priorities and everything. And it's that, integration and the ability to talk to somebody, which or lack thereof, which can cause these psychological crises, existential crises. So do you find that happens with some of your...
Yeah. See, it's funny, like, you know, the existential crisis, like Dark Night of the Soul thing. Doing something like a quest can either help you get through it, or it could also help put you into one.
Yeah.
It's sort of just a matter of, like, where you're at in your development. But either way, it's a sign of, like, well, I don't like using the word progress, but, you know, it's a sign of coming to more and more ability to make meaning in a way that gets closer to truth.
Yes.
It's one way of putting it.
Someone's truth.
Yeah.
And the truth. There you go.
Yeah. So, yeah, it definitely, you know, is something that does happen. And but this gets back to, like, because I don't like talking about things of, like, you know, in terms of this is personal development.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of this is to develop ourselves in partnership with the rest of life. Because that ultimate truth is that we are not separate. I mean, people say that 1,000 times, but there's so much spiritual shit going around that's like, let's just, you know, work on our blah, 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 you know, and it's all from this mindset of the person as this individual ego.
Yeah.
Not that they would ever use that word, but they don't realize that they're projecting that deeply held worldview onto spirituality.
Yes.
And then what happens is people have these so-called peak experiences or moments of, like, clarity or the feeling of power or whatever, and then the ego just goes, I'll take that, you know, and finds a way to integrate what's happened into their story of why I'm so good, or, you know, I mean, the ego works in other ways other than just I'm good. It also really reinforces I'm shit too.
Oh, yeah.
It just wants control, you know.
Yeah.
But that's why, you know, working with nature is so important, because we're working in tandem to, yes, get to know our inner nature, but it's also a process of coming to know outer nature.
Yes.
And ultimately true nature at the same time. And if we do that, then the risk of existential crisis becomes a hell of a lot less, because we see ourselves as just part of this greater pattern of things. And so, you know, we don't get that. I don't feel quite so isolated, because I come to know that, you know, we're never really alone. You know, if you can go out into the wilderness for 4 days, like...
100%.
You know, and this is,
And you're not alone.
You're not alone.
And things, even the stuff in the interior, is not that bad.
Yeah.
It's not that scary.
Because where do you, like, sit with it? And this is, you know, you mentioned, you know, ayahuasca, which can be very helpful. But the thing that I really like about the quest as an alternative to that approach is that, like I was saying, how we give people a lot of room to make decisions for what level of, like, comfort they want.
Yeah.
A really big part of that for me, and, like, how I aim to, like, hold the space for people, is that I'm giving them the power to make their own decisions, because ultimately then they know everything that happens comes from them, the choices that they've made, and their
Yes.
authentic relationship with life around them.
Yes.
And there was no need for anything else to, you know, be taken or imbibed or
Yeah.
passing over their power to a shaman or, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Like you said, you know, if it's time to tap out, they can leave the message.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they can walk out.
They can, yeah, they can
Yeah.
come back in. I'm there all the time, you know. It's
Yeah.
everyone gets what they need.
Yes.
And even, you know, quests can look very different.
Yeah,
People come out with
100%.
completely different stories.
Well, again, we're talking
but-
about that interior subjective experience.
Yeah.
So they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to say like, oh, do a quest and, you know, like the existential thing isn't a problem, because it really can be. I mean, you know, sometimes people do a few quests and then the existential crisis comes, because it really is, you know, it takes a lot of undoing of how we've been conditioned. And then it's hard to then know how to sort of operate and function in a world that comes from a very different place. But yeah, once you've started on the journey, at least you're better resourced to know then how to, you know, keep working through it. Yeah.
Do you find in the bunny ears sales and marketing of this, because it is your work and business, what are you laughing at?
Buddy ears, sorry, I
Bunny
realised I
ears.
was doing that a lot.
Yeah, bunny ears. That I would imagine for something like this, that when someone's called to it, then they're called to it.
Yeah.
And then okay, this is probably discussion and taking away a couple of the like top level barriers of, oh, well, how does it work and this, that and the other.
Yeah.
But if somebody's called, then they're called.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, I've given up. Like,
Trying to convince people into it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even want to. would
I
you?
mean, no, you don't want to convince people into it, because then there's a mismatch between what they think
Yeah.
they're doing and what they're really kind of willing to surrender to. Yeah, and it's always a funny thing. Like, you know, more and more, I want, you know, my work and how I earn money to be, you know, just how I get what needs to sustain me. It doesn't have to be money, but you know, I want it to be at least then feeding all this good stuff and this sort of work that's really important in the world. But yeah, that sales and marketing, it's like I've literally just given up. I'm just like, I am just gonna share it, hope people, you know, hear
Those who
the
catch on
real
will catch on.
yeah, resonate with it. I mean, you know, of course there's a job to get the invitation out to people and
Yeah.
you know, in a way that's clear so they can understand it and all that kind of thing. But,
Yeah.
It gets trickier because I'm trying to tailor the work more and more to, not tailor it, but to be able to work with groups, not just individuals, because, you know, which relates to what we were just discussing, like there comes a point when individual work development realizations kind of reaches this pressure point when it butts up against a collective life that is, you know, operating from a very different place.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, we need to be able to take that kind of awareness from the individual and have it integrated as part of our collective life.
Yeah.
So I'm more and more interested in working with organisations, not because corporate pays well, but because we actually need that to be integrated into, you know, mainstream life. Like, I'm all for like working on building the new and alternative systems, but at some point we also need part of what's the current system to go through a form of, you know, transition.
Yeah.
Or at least to be ready to jump on board when some step change, you know, kind of enters. And then we also get the effect that, you know, culture gradually changes. And so we have more and more people who, you know, are willing to support, you know, someone who's gone through a big transition,
Yes.
you know, in a workplace. Like, you know, when you're not meant, you know, at the moment, it's more normal to not talk about,
Yes.
you know, that kind of thing.
And one of the things in the research that we've found is that, that some of the things that make it uncomfortable and jarring is knowing that oh, I need to have some time off work because I just can't function. But
Yeah.
there's expectations on me at work and I can't say that. So I'll just say something to do with mental health, and that
Yeah.
might be enough to keep people at bay for a week or
Yeah. Not, I need some space to integrate.
two. Yeah, it's not really a thing. So if we come out of this and take on board, you know, particularly nature as a key component, and a great, as you said before, like a church and teacher, etc., etc. What are you seeing going on in our community, society, culture, particularly here in 2020, which has been a fascinating year to say the least? Because you strike me as someone who's very connected, not just to individuals, but collectives as well. What do you feel at the moment? Because, I'll let you just go.
Yeah. I mean, lots of different ways to answer that question.
Yeah.
I feel...
I appreciate it's a massive, broad question.
Yeah. I feel cautiously excited because I get the sense that 2020 has been a very galvanizing year. Like in terms of it really asking us really who we are, what do we value, and realizing that, you know, things are going to be changing anyway. So how can we feel that we have some influence over that direction of change? Like, I feel like there's more of a desire to be active, in terms of, you know, having some power over where things are going. And, you know, all the things that have gone on, you know, even, you know, we just recently, you know, with the US elections and that kind of thing. But even with COVID and, you know, that sense of like, well, who really knows what's going on? I believe that there's more and more, there's a lack of faith in just taking, you know, the mainstream like narrative for how things are. Not saying that, of course, it hasn't then forced people to want to hold on to that more tightly, because, you know, we feel it slipping through our fingers, and we want what we thought was, you know, our solid ground. But it makes me excited because I think then, you know, while it's like a rite of passage, while it's not comfortable, that if we can, you know, embrace the ordeal and fully go into it, then we can really do that, you know, alchemy and come out the other side. I mean, I notice like there's been just in the last month or two, like so many more people than normal contact me about a quest, or, you know, have...
Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. I actually thought it was going to be earlier.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, okay, everyone's really going to, I need, you know, I want something to help me navigate this shit show of, you know, just what the fuck, you know.
I need something.
Exactly. And because for me, like, I don't know how I would get through life if I didn't have that anchor to, you know, the sacred in a way. Like, the gifts that I've been given out, you know, on solo time, possibly the biggest one of them all is just that little, you know, flame that sometimes it's hard to see, but like deep inside there's somewhere that knows that I can trust life and how it unfolds. And that...
I love that, trust life and how it unfolds.
Yeah. Because when you realise, like, the fundamental, you know, life force itself is always seeking to promote life.
Yeah.
So, and even if you like look at, you know, patterns in nature, for example, even though some systems go into decay and some, you know, species try something weird and it fails, all that's still learning for the bigger whole.
Yeah.
So, you know, and when something decays, it releases energy that then nourishes something else.
Well, a couple of weeks ago ended up having a fantastic conversation with Graham Upson from Touchwood Mushrooms down in Denmark.
Oh, cool.
Very gifted mushroom. I wouldn't say grower, cultivator.
Cool.
But when you actually dive into just what's going on in the mycelium network and the mushrooms, you know, a tree falls over and then all of a sudden these things arrive and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
And the spores are always traveling.
Yeah.
And you just understand that, yeah, it's constantly on, constantly progressing, moving, morphing.
Totally.
And it was just fascinating. And to me, there was just so much to learn, consider and meditate on from a bigger systemic point of view.
Absolutely.
And that was just mushrooms.
Exactly. And I I don't think it works it's useful to go and look at things in nature and then think how I can apply that back to my lived experience. But I think you probably got those, lessons, points for reflection from those mushrooms, because you already have, a backing in, consciousness development and whatever you want to call it. Because I think at some level, learning from nature is a process that is a very embodied process. So, when I think where does that trust of life come from? It would not be the same if I went, oh, well, ecosystems work in a way in which...
you get a head answer.
Yeah, which is useful.
Yeah.
But really, needs to be coupled with that, felt sense of, life wanting to work through you and with you and supporting you, which you see in, signs of whether it's, synchronicity, things happening right at the right time. And, and sometimes it's so playful, you just burst out laughing, what appears at the right moment or, it's beautiful. And, the space of a quest, and especially, longer periods of time, you start to see that you just go, oh my God, this is actually all the time.
This is on all the time.
Yeah.
And I think, I was guilty in my 30s. In my 20s, I did a lot of traveling. I went on all sorts of adventures, and I felt like I was always connected to whatever was going on. In the 30s, I go off into some corporate management consulting career, and it's only when you're on holiday you suddenly sit, after a couple of days, you go through the ritual of get shit-faced for 3 days, and then feel crap for a couple of days, and then finally bottom out to being quiet. And then you just look outside wherever you are and you just go, wow, that tree has always been there. And it's just looking at me. It's been looking at me for the last several days. And it's always there and it's always faithfully waiting. I always find, nature's faithfully waiting. Well, it's getting on with its own business, but it's always there, very welcoming. It's it's like almost the greatest sign of unconditional love.
Totally.
We're always here, dude, whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
We're never not here.
Yeah. Totally. That's, how nature's always ready to share its gifts because, and that to me is even, I always think about a gift economy as, if we were to need another, way of distributing resources, make sure everyone gets what they need, just like everything, and which I think we're getting better at realizing is living systems principles kind of work.
Yeah.
How can we humans do that too? And the gift economy is like the natural economy because nature's not judging, going, oh, well, I'm only going to give these 3 apples to that animal because they didn't do that other thing.
Yeah.
It's you give, and it gets back to trusting life, right? You give because you trust that if you're, contributing to this growing, flourishing system, you always get what you need back because you are part of it. You are meant to be part of it. You actually belong as part of it. So, yeah.
Which is where we've gone so far apart from.
We've forgotten all that. And it will take... It's not to say that that's not just because I reckon it's true. It also doesn't mean it's easy. I don't think getting back to humans living in harmony with the natural world is going to happen quickly. You know, like I wouldn't say that I'm optimistic, even though I trust life. I wouldn't say that I'd be necessarily described as optimistic about, you know, the next century or two.
Yeah.
But also when you see things in greater and greater wholes, you also go, that's also okay. You know, I'm not saying that I particularly am looking forward to experiencing, you know, as system breakdown gets closer to home. But, you know, when you go, I'm part of life and life is doing its thing, and in a way that's beautiful.
Yeah. That's not to give us a bypass on our decisions that we make. But sometimes, you know, sometimes I find it's all very easy to, particularly here in WA, and that's probably again a reference from living in England, it's very easy for people, and even in myself, to go, oh, we need to go back to old ways of doing this, this and this. And it's easy to do that, but at the same time I think to myself, well, life, spirit, consciousness, whatever you want to say, it's we've evolved this way. And nature doesn't do things for shits and giggles. There is a reason why we've evolved this way. It doesn't necessarily mean that the end point is now, you know, and our minds love end points, right? It doesn't like process or in process. You know, I've used the analogy before. If I had a ball in my hand and threw it up in the air, your mind's not going to be really happy with the ball until it's back in my hand and it's done the travel. But it's been there all the time. So it's kind of, it's not to give us a free pass on facing up to our responsibilities, but at the same time, calm down and just go, well, you know, nature's pushing us, or consciousness is pushing us in this direction to learn something, to move somewhere. Where that may be, where the end of this stage development destination is.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Exactly.
But it's part of it. So when you get into the real darkest parts of the existential impact of considering what we're doing with nature and our lack of connection, it's still there. It's still waiting. Things like vision quests are there. There's a reason why more and more people are being dragged to.
Yeah.
And I like, you know, I like the idea of collectively that we've had to sort of go away to fully appreciate and come back with something new, whatever that is. You know, I like the whole idea of transcend and include, transcend and include.
Yeah. Important. And I also like, it's such an interesting line of questioning, you know,
inquiry,
you know, it gets to like, what's the role of humans? It also gets to, you know, you've also got to be careful about going, just because it's all okay doesn't mean humans are actually a part of the future, because sometimes species do come up and then they disappear, you know, because we're serving a function for the whole, I'm sure. Ultimately that function might be to cause of enough of a disruption that after we're gone there's a great flourishing of life. You know, so I don't ever take it for granted that just because humans are here for a reason actually means that nature's going to keep us.
Yes.
You know, like I think actually that's still very much up to us.
Yes.
Because no matter how we play it, nature's going to incorporate it ultimately.
Yeah.
And, you know, I find a lot of, you know, spiritual and even nature love and actually more so nature loving people end up in this like, oh, well, you know, humans are crap, nature is good, but it's okay when we're gone, nature will be fine. So really we just have to worry about, you know, then it goes into weird, like, so we just have to worry about the humans, or we just have to hurry up and get over and done with, or let's just ignore it all because I don't know what that means. Like, but I'm like, no, but that's actually the question is really what is our role here? Because just say nature will be fine eventually. We're already causing, you know, this 6 mass extinction. Some modelling of climate change shows we could wipe out virtually all life on Earth. Maybe it'll come, you know, guessing it'll probably come back. But like, just how much is acceptable to us, like, and ultimately, like, yeah, are we living up to the role that we've been given? So I really do like those, you know, the role of having a grand narrative, like a story that tells us where humans have come from and why we're here. So obviously, you know, the common theme in Indigenous cultures, and including Noongar culture, that story of us being the carers of everything, custodianship, you know, there's a common theme around humans were given the role of looking after everything. And that's what I think, you know, ultimately that's the only answer to all those questions, that we can at least rest in that a bit and not try to, like, just stop trying to work it all out, because we'll never work it out. There's no right answer, really.
Oh, yeah. Was it the complexity of the current challenges faced are way bigger than the horsepower of one individual.
Totally. Absolutely. And so, you know, coming back to go, well, how are we, you know, because ultimately what that means to me is like we're acting just like nature does in terms of like trying to take care of all of life and trying to promote the flourishing of all. So, you know, that's where just embodying nature comes back to being so important, because the more that we can, you know, embody those principles and embody generativity itself, to me, that's where the answer, you know, once you go through that line of questioning, to me, that's the only place it can really kind of come back to. Because I think if you stop at any point in time and go, well, I don't have to do anything because it's all perfect, you're like, well, you've just cut yourself off from that process, because you've just, you know, stopped listening because you've decided that. And that's not, you know, that's not nature, that's not flow, that's not life moving through you. That's like you actually cutting that off. Or likewise, nature will be fine, which is a lovely trust in nature, but also then cutting yourself off from it. You know, it's
exactly.
Yeah.
Do you? So here's a question, probably a more personal one. Is that over the last several years, before any sort of large-scale collective events like COVID, etc., for you to do the work that you've done, obviously you've been through your journey, which is your interior experience, and I find that previous to 2020, you kind of have to hold your own space. And now, because there's more of these shared, larger experiences, it sets a nice context for people to open up to these sorts of discussions. Does that make sense? So, how have you found the journey from holding your own space to almost like, because, do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, like finally the time has come.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. That's kind of it, because, you know, I've been doing this podcast for 3 years, and I've listened to people's stories, and it felt like different people are on their own little stories, on their own little journeys. And I've started to, through doing it, notice patterns in things that people are saying, and so I'm starting to go, whoa, this is more like the truth of what the human experience is about. But the narrative that we tell ourselves is just so far apart. And now, and there's never been these sort of reconciliation events collectively. Individually, yes, but individually you can pass those off really quickly. Or they can be, you know, pushed down or whatever. But now, you know, we were all asked to stay at home and this, that, and the other, you know, everybody had to be at home. Everybody had to be with themselves. Everybody. So all of a sudden now, the conversation that I've been sort of having with a smaller group of people, now all of a sudden everybody wants to chat to Bryn about this. And you've sort of intimated that with more people want to come on Vision Quests and stuff like that. So I guess the sort of question I'd like to hear your view on is, have you seen a similar sort of thing? And are you seeing like a closing of the gap between almost the bullshit narrative we tell ourselves and the reality and truth of who we are and what we're up to?
Yes.
Or at least the genesis towards that.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably I can't answer that completely, just because through all this, like, I've been quite insular myself in this feeling of like you know, really needing to stay, like not jump into action too quickly. Like even after restrictions have been lifted, sometimes like going out to, I'm like, oh my God, too soon.
Yeah.
And that's probably for other reasons, but I've felt personally still like just, I haven't been reaching out to too many people so far to have a flavour of what the, you know, broader conversation is like. However, I feel like even just, you know, looking at and you know, talking to friends who work in different disciplines, there does seem to be more and more of a people coming back to the same kinds of ways of thinking about things, and much more integrated, and those little moments that come up in conversations where you're talking about, you know, examples from very, very different contexts, but people are starting to notice the same kinds of patterns and same kinds of, you know, desire to just go, oh, could we just like stop with the, you know, the nonsense, like whether it's, you know, people getting more and more interested in, you know, how the economy functions, and less and less people having trust that, like, oh yeah, you should just buy a house and, you know, be part of this bigger thing, to, you know, there's that type of conversation, to like getting more interested in local economies and local currency and all that kind of thing. It all ends up looking like, yes, more and more people are realizing that we need to be inventing other ways.
Yes.
And that needs to come from, you know, a much more real place of like connection, and it needs to be serving all of humanity, but also more and more about the realization of including nature. So I can only really answer your question in a general way, because I'm sort of, you know, in the process of getting myself to that point of doing a, you know, conversation-based project that aims to weave in, you know, different areas. So sure, if we talk about this in like 6 months' time, I'm going to have plenty of stories.
More articulate.
Yeah, because that's kind of the goal. I mean, that's sort of the premise that it's based upon, is that we are sort of ready for this higher level of, you know, sense making, and that we're ready to actually form this sort of group, you know, community, like collective coherence.
Yes.
So that we have a common language, we've made sense with enough, you know, on enough of a level of collective intelligence that gives us a platform to sort of move from. Like, I'm launching this project because I do really believe that there's that readiness, and, you know, now's the time that people are open to it and willing to it and desire to explore. So yeah, I hope that's right.
Yes. Yeah, I do feel there's a general shifting in people's collective sense making, or we're starting to see that.
Which is funny though, because it's at the same time as all this polarization happening.
Well, yeah. I think we're underplaying as well the collective trauma that's occurring and has occurred in the past. You know, the way that we've done things, you know, since the post-Enlightenment rational, you know, 1960s when we moved into the postmodern world. You know, those sort of transitions, and the collective response to what has occurred this year. I mean, it's unparalleled. And I don't think anybody's not, at some point, not felt safe in the world. You know, all the pillars that we hold on to have been moved or taken away or shifted, or things, all those things that we orientate ourselves with. I did a really interesting exercise one day with my journal broke it back to what are the things that I reference myself with, and I made a list of them, and then I wrote down, are they actually tangibly real, or are they an internal construct? And, you know, when I stripped it back, it came down to things like, am I awake? Am I asleep? Is the sun up? Is the sun up? You know, am I in the ocean? Am I wet or am I dry? You know, and, you know, nature was definitely one of those as well, and the interaction with it. And I've said several times in previous podcast, Richard Grannon was really good. You know, the sun is good, nature is good. Like, we've lost many of that, but it's also, they're great places to just reference ourselves before we start referencing ourselves with all the rest of the junk.
Yeah.
And the constructs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, previous podcast guest Thomas Bjorkman talked about air and money. We all say that we can't live without either of them, but we could collectively agree tomorrow that we don't have to bother with money.
Yeah.
Be a big job, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not being idealistic, but we can't collectively suddenly say tomorrow we're not going to bother with air.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nature to me is like it's truth in terms of, it's the great leveler, because ultimately if we didn't, you know, have a planet or, you know, healthy ecosystems, water, air, then we would be fucked. But also in that way that nature is spirit made manifest. It is just creation expressing itself. And so that's why all those, you know, beautiful wise like Lao Tzu, Taoist, or, you know, Buddhist, they're great at using nature metaphors. I mean, Aboriginal people are amazing at using nature metaphors. And they use it because they express truth more eloquently and, you know, simplistically than anything else that we could explain. And that's why I've got, you know, one of the things I'm trying to work on is how to not just talk to, like, you know, leaders or organizations about living systems principles and how that could apply to, you know, like organizational design or whatever, because that's, you know, kind of other people have already started that work, but also then how to give people that deep, you know, embodied, connected experience in nature to sort of, you know, be able to marry the two of like a felt sense of those patterns in nature married with the like cognitive understanding of like, you know, how to be an agent in a complex adaptive system. How could we organize around principles of how nature organizes? And I think that like...
How's that received?
Well, I don't know yet. I'm testing.
Oh, right.
I'm about to test all this.
Excellent.
I feel like, you know, when I have conversations with people about it, you know, just informal ones so far, it's, you know, so far it is like, oh yeah, of course, you know, like it kind of makes sense. I mean, I've worked with a couple of organizations so far who get it, but it's always taken, you know, one leader who's, you know, already really switched on, who wants to then, you know, bring that to more and more of their staff. But, you know, people are at different stages of readiness. So we have been strategizing how to be, you know, smart in the approach to, you know, meeting people where they're at. Because it is complex, you know, like it's complexity intellectually, it's complexity even like emotionally, because the process of connecting brings up a lot of stuff for people. And like people's healing journey can't not be, you know, part of all that too, because if I'm helping give people a sort of, you know, deep experience out in nature, you can't not talk about that stuff. And you know,
and not talking about it will actually send you into some sort of neurosis or psychosis, which is probably worse than where you were before.
Totally, and it's not.
So this is the challenge I find, and it's like taking these bigger integrated thinking, but then putting them into these quite narrow organisms of, let's just say, like a corporate business environment. And I say narrow because they're there to serve like one, maybe two functions, i.e. deliver profit, shareholder return. And we can dress it up like we want, you know, community engagement and all of that. But, you know, I been a business consultant for 15 years, and I've seen how, you know, how much money is spent on community engagement and all the great stuff, and then how that disappears so quickly when you dial down the profitability and stuff like that, you know. And so, and there's always that reward that's then linked within the consumer catalyst system, you know, and it, to me, without seeming pessimistic, it's always destined to fail.
Yeah.
Because we're not recognizing where the organization sits in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And there's not that many people who can hold all the different nuances in their concentration span at the different levels all at the same time. Because what you're talking about is deeply nuanced, and does require people to hold opposite tensions of opposites and things like that, to understand that, you know, even nature itself can contradict itself. You know, the amazingly growing stuff here, and then not decaying stuff and entropy there, and it's like, well, what's one and the other, and you know, so it can be challenging. And I you know, as one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you again today is because if anybody can see how it's not, like I said, pessimistically destined to fail, because it's one slither within a big integrated thing, then fuck, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I get sick of that. Like, I mean, it was a line I heard today. Like, oh, there's not a tension between, you know, making money and doing good, because, you know, look at all these examples of businesses who do better because they're doing good, because it's not what people. Well, I'm like, that's good in some cases, but the reality is that, like, you can't. The whole economic system is built on taking things that were complex and making it simple, like turning nature into products, turning human and their relationships into sellable chunks of data. That is an entropic system, you know, let alone, you know, that's just thinking in that living system complexity stuff. Like, to me, like, it's just obvious, like, but you know, it's that. But that's where I kind of hope COVID and all the other disruption that's happened, you know, especially this year, but has been happening a lot more in general, helps create the space for conversations where, you know, the transition part, there will be a phase of, like, weird, we were in one, you know, phase state, and we're moving to some other one, and we don't know what that is yet.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and that's okay, but it doesn't mean just ignore that until that time has come. It means that there's a period of transition that we can be smart about, and I hope to be finding more and more leaders and organizations who go, we know that what we're doing could be completely different in the future. We may not even have a role in the future, who knows? But we need to be creating space, you know, for that conversation that goes, shit, well, we say we want to make profit and do good. We actually know that that's really difficult. But so to have that real conversation about it's a fundamentally flawed, self-terminating system that we are a part of. We don't want to necessarily feed it.
Game A, as it's known.
Yet we also, the game B isn't here yet. So, like, what can we do that's in full acknowledgement of this situation, even though that's completely weird for us to talk about as a, you know, business or, you know, I don't know, it's not just businesses that, you know, I think this is applicable to, but where's that, I think there's more opening now to have that acknowledgement, and definitely openness, but still going, like, it's so challenging because, like I said, it's complex mentally, it's complex emotionally, it's complex spiritually. And people are at different levels of readiness. So how can 100%. We create, what did I say to my friend once, like islands of safety and nodes of resilience, you know, where people can be supporting each other, because, like, I mean, it comes full circle back around to that, notion of existential crisis and, the lack of ability to support each other in our collective life, because the culture's not there. But how could you, in the groups you're already involved with, whether it's work, whether it's a community group or volunteer, whatever it is, like be able to change at least the culture within your own group, at least be able to have honest conversations about where you're at and how you're working and helping each other and navigating that
honest
transition.
Conversations.
Yeah.
Yes.
And realizing that, okay, like let's think about some principles that we're aiming to try to live by, and we're going to keep our awareness open to when, the opportunity comes for us to, move and be able to integrate that more, because that's really, like, what's that saying? Like, we need more leaders like the samurai that have meditated on the 1,000 ways they could die. Not so they're so much willing to go and die, but so that when they're faced with a really tough situation, it's not a shock to them, that you're actually prepared for it. And that's like real, resilience on like a collective level to me. Like, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So we need to be having those spaces for those, pretty confronting conversations about the reality of where we're at.
Yeah, and stay open in those conversations.
And how do we still live with joy despite all that? That's really what takes up most of my, time and thinking. That's the big picture of where it all fits. And then, the answer is nature, tools like questing, and healing. Yeah.
So the last question I ask all my guests, hypothetical one, I love the answers out of these, is if you could upload a single question into the collective consciousness, so everybody just sat still for 10 minutes and considered it all at once, what would that be?
I'm always really bad at thinking of questions, but the one that came to me straight away when you said that was, who am I? To contemplate, who am I? Which is, it's a spiritual practice, to get to that, what am I not? And strip away identity, because that reforming of identity to, to be more aligned with fundamental truth or spirituality, oneness, whatever you want to call it. But also that leaves space to then reform our identity in the context of, which again, it's where I think nature's so important, is that we also need to have that sense of like, we are our place, and we are our relationships, and we are our ecology.
We are. Without sounding wanky, we are all in this together.
Indeed. Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today.
Thanks for creating.
Super enjoyed it.
Yeah. Me too.
If people want to find you and reach out, where do they find you?
My website's clairevanderplank.com, and I'm on Facebook. If you're interested particularly in the quests, Way of Nature WA is the Facebook page where I'll put all the dates for the quests, or if you go to the website and you can sign up for the newsletter, and then you'll get notified when an event occurs. Yeah, those are good spots.
Indeed. Claire, thank you very much.
Thank you.